August the 27th, 2024. Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to be your host. I'm Dana. Welcome. You can call in at 709-589-4406. We're on schedule tonight. That's great news. Hope everybody had a great day. Except for the pro-nuclear. I don't know what. How do you describe these people? They look like people. They think they're people, but clearly there's something missing in the equation. The world's food chain could be compromised. The world's food chain. Top 20 U.S. newspapers. The world's food chain. The entire planet's food chain. And so the food chain is not just humans. It's not just humans. And the releases are not just into the ocean from Japan, but you got 70 years of just nothing but nightmarish releases from around the world. Every nuclear power plant is hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools. Such a disaster. And so how was it that all the nuclear scientists on the planet didn't know this was the ultimate outcome? That the radiation would break the food chain? That's the poll tonight. Did the nuclear scientists always know that the radioactive fallout would break the food chain and cause an extinction level event? I can't see how they didn't. And this was done to the ocean. This is Fukushima's model from Germany based on 6 years of emissions. But that's a radioactive plume based on 26 days that covers the entire planet, which means that's not valid. And it means the entire food chain was compromised within less than 30 days. And there was a lot of academics and scientists originally spoke out in absolute horror. But slowly but surely they disappeared. And so I do a lot of research expeditions, and we've been doing this post-Fukushima. And we didn't do it on a knee-jerk response. We've done it methodically after gathering up a bizarre amount of documentation. And we were waiting for someone else to do it, go out and report on the coastline. That didn't happen. And I remember the heartbreak of all the stories I was reading, and you would always see this flood of people. Why don't somebody do something? Why don't somebody, And I said to myself, it took a long time on you that I realized that I'm going to have to do it myself. It was an overwhelming feeling on top of that. The explosion is reactor 3. That was a plutonium mixed oxide reactor. And that was reclaimed uranium, reclaimed plutonium. And that the radioactive fallout is considered by the U.S. government 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. And so a single atom is pulsing energy at the speed of light in every direction every second. Cesium-137 will pulse 600 feet. And so this stuff has blanketed the entire planet. And a lot of people are playing dumb because they can't see it or smell it or or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it. But they know better. And they know that the average person has zero possibilities of comprehending the story. But if they were to come across someone like myself, who pretty good at articulating the story after all this time, then that would be a problem, because they couldn't hide away from their friends and families and their loved ones the true nature of who they are. These are certifiable monsters. They look like us. They got 10 digits on their hands and 10 digits on their feet. They got facial hair. They got eyeballs. They look just like us, but they're not like us at all. And they're very smart, very intelligent, very well educated, very well funded, and very, very sadistic. And they take great pleasure in what they're doing. They take great pleasure in covering up what's happening. And I know that might sound incredible to the so-called newbies, but I can assure you this is exactly the reality of what we're talking about. And they span an amazing litany of positions in governments and universities and medias and academics, and think tanks, etc., etc. They have infiltrated our society, and we don't have an option to sit in silence. That's the worst option. And again, for a few years, there's quite a lot of people speaking out. We're going to walk you through some of that. And I'm most likely going to get to some of the recent research that we've done. I have that queued up and ready to go. But this story is so heartbreaking. In order for me to tell the story and do the work, my dedication has to be absolute. And I really don't have time for anything else in my life. Which makes life very difficult, no matter who you are. It's very tough it's such a terrible story, right? And there's no good side to this story. And the good side is that there's a group of us that are trying to help this planet and the species. And so at least we know there's a small, very tiny group of people that exist, 100%, and that do care about everybody, including the scumbags that have betrayed us for 80 years straight. This betrayal, and the academic community was aware this is where we're going to end up, an extinction event. And you don't need a meltdown, you don't need a nuclear accident. Once the fuel comes out of the reactor cores, it's still splitting atoms, and there's no containment. Those atoms can't be contained or released into the ecosystem, and they never go away. Fukushima peaches on sale outside of Japan. That was 2012. They hadn't started picking up 1-ton bags at this point yet. And after this, they had picked up over 30 million 1-ton bags. So these are deadly peaches. This is not maybe, not perhaps, not we'll see what happens. You eat this stuff, your body attacks it for the rest of your life and tries to build a tumor around it, but it compromises your immune system. And this is true for all species. And at the same time, because there was so much, there was so much of a plume that the entire ecosystem has suffered significant full-body X-rays. And that's caused by gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas. They're pulsing energy almost at the speed of light in every direction. Now, when these entities, these foreign creatures, these foreign objects, because they're not made by the solar system, they're not created by the sun, these are called man-made anthropogenic emitters. And this is why we have so-called terrorist laws. And they have nothing in common with the natural elements on the planet. They have zero in common. and that nothing on the planet with replicating cells has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. And so you got gammas pulsing at the speed of light, alphas pulsing at the speed of light, betas pulsing at the speed of light, neutrons pulsing at the speed of light every second. And when they hit each other, almost at the speed of light, one coming almost at the speed of light, another one coming at almost at the speed of light, and when they touch each other, they reflect. And it's known as a braking effect, a Bremsung. It's a German word, I think, that was originally used to describe this effect as a braking effect. We would describe it as a braking effect. So you have two objects traveling almost at the speed of light, and they brake, change direction. And that deflection, almost at the speed of light, each object, this is incredible stuff, creates another special effect. So you got gammas, alphas, betas, and neutrons, and the braking effect. And we describe that as an X-ray. And so the entire ecosystem, the forest, everything, the meadows, is an incredible diversity of microscopic animals. And this reflection, and the gammas, betas, neutrons, and alphas, and so the Cesium-137 is pulsing energy of 600 feet. But we're talking about a snowstorm, an actual snowstorm of radiation that never goes away, never stops coming out, and you can't perceive it typically. But the fundamental of the biosphere, the ecosystem, the microscopic animals, once you eradicate them, everything falls. And it plays out pretty slow in the scope of things, but it'll play out in a short part of your lifetime. Government promotes the idea that you're racist if you avoid Fukushima food. And nuclear activists to be constantly spied upon. The entire process has echoes of George Orwell, which is a famous writer, and wrote about totalitarian, tyrannical police and government and bureaucracies that became power hungry and monstrous at the same time. So the last thing you do want to eat is food from a nuclear wasteland. This is, by the way, where we have terrorist laws. And that all of these checks and balances got thrown out the window post-Fukushima. And so we are in real harm. We are in real danger. And they have thousands of public relation firms just for North America that at the beck and call of the nuclear industry to protect the nuclear industry. But that doesn't really cover the entire scope of what we're talking about. The Pentagon has 29,000 public relation officers, and they're very dependent upon the nuclear industry. So there's a lot of money. There's $1 trillion a year, or $1 trillion over the next number of years just for them alone at stake. There's the stock markets, the uranium mines. There's actually 9,000 industries. And their families, their loved ones, their associates, and the businesses all have a big stake in protecting an industry. So you're up against an absurd amount of evil that are willfully, the majority of them are willfully evil on top of it, because that's their bread and butter. Authorities hid the radioactive plume forecast to avoid evacuations. Now, we touched up on that, a lot of those communities last night, and the radioactive fallout per square meter in those communities is considered something you would never consider pre-Fukushima, that it was even conceivable that it could happen, let alone that the people that you hired to protect you were the ones that were the quickest to cut your throat and abandon you and leave you no exit. And let me explain that. They hid the radioactive plume forecast to avoid evacuations. In Tokyo, Now, they picked up 30 million one-ton bags in 3% of the land of just Fukushima Prefecture, but 14 prefectures were significantly radioactive that the food was banned by 55 countries for a decade. And Tokyo, 240 kilometers away, had numbers after a single rainfall of 29 million atoms per square meter. This is a no-go zone. This is supposed to be completely permanently evacuated. But you're talking about 36 million people. And so if you've done that, that's the death of the nuclear industry. Too sweet, right? That's immediately going to be the death of the nuclear industry. And so the nuclear industry is very powerful. They're very arrogant. They're very wealthy, and they have all the universities, all the medias, and the government agencies at their beck and call that are willing, on a drop of a hat, to attack anybody that would disrupt their meat wagon, so to speak. But 29 million atoms in a single rainfall, that's never going to go away. 185 atoms, not 118,000 or 1,800 or 18,500 or 185,000 or 29 million. So 185 atoms was an evacuation zone pre-Fukushima, and so now there is no rules, and that's the worst case scenario. Radiation forecast withheld by the government. Releasing it would cause an unnecessary panic, and the ministry, which you hired to protect you from radiation, decided such a data would be unavailable because they would lose power, is how they saw it. So they decided not to tell anybody. But the taxpayers had paid for this documentation, paid for these models, paid for these equipment, paid for their courses to look for the radiation. And when they finally had an accident, their job now, they figure, was to not tell anybody. Former Fukushima Daiichi worker, this is 2012, I believe the country would be evacuated if the number 4 fuel pool collapsed. And there should be hundreds of thousands of people working furiously every day. So think about that statement. Imagine if your power plant breaks down and hundreds of thousands, so they're suggesting 4, 5, 600,000 people should be working furiously every day. That's a technology that definitely shouldn't exist. You have to give me that. Now, right alongside of Reactor 4 was Reactor 3, which was infinitely worse than Reactor 4 because it was a plutonium mixed oxide reactor. And it ejected the reactor cores out of the reactor and 8 reactor cores out of the fuel pools. And these reactor cores are much more powerful, much more larger than Chernobyl's reactor core. And it's easy to suggest and document rather that there are at least 100 Chernobyls each. So there's 36 reactor cores minimum that were destroyed and melted down, or was atomized in aerosol and released into the biosphere. But just one of these reactor cores is worse than all nuclear meltdowns in history combined that we know about, because we're talking about such a huge inventory. Fukushima had 4 reactor cores. Reactor 1, 2, and 3 were running. They were totally destroyed and melted down, and Reactor 3, of course, detonated and ejected. This was a steam explosion, not a hydrogen, and ejected the reactor core right out of the buildings and the fuel pools right out of the buildings. Now, they built it on a fault line with a 3,000-year legacy of tsunamis, large tsunamis at that, and 1,000 earthquakes a year. And that they're only 35 or 40 miles from the tectonic plates that'll do that. And this is why they had such enormous tsunamis. So building it in a fragile place, clearly, with the fuel pools at the top of the building, they must have had the expectations that this was going to happen at some point. And most likely they were able to predict when it was going to happen. And so why would you store the fuel pools above the reactor cores? Which only makes sense if you're expecting a nuclear meltdown, you lose the entire inventories, and you would start a cascade effect that ultimately ends up with an extinction event. And this was the straw that broke the planet's back, because you already had 70 years of emissions into the biosphere and the ecosystem and the oceans and the biggest aquifers on the planet. Just let me explain that for 1 second, because because we have this fortunate ability of hindsight. Hang on here. Let me just go flash and grab it. And what I'm looking for is the Great Lakes here in Canada, United States. And the Great Lakes is the third biggest body of fresh water on the entire planet. Drinking water, consumable, good for crops and everything else. Beautiful fresh water. And so why would we build all of our nuclear plants and nuclear dumps on the shorelines of the only freshwater resource, the biggest freshwater aquifers on the entire planet? Let me do this then. I got to relabel it because sometimes it's a little hard. Here we go, coming along. Maybe. We dug this up last night. I had no problem. How come we're having a bit of a problem tonight? Yeah, it happens. Just bear with me. I did think it was in an odd place. I did think it was in an odd place last night, though. I don't know. It's a very important folder, so a little bit. Let's keep on going, I guess. And what it is, it's a model of the Great Lakes in North America. I'm just going to have to make it again after the show and put it back. Doesn't make any sense that it's not in the folder that it should be in. Unless I put it over here. Anyway, and I got it. So this model of the Great Lakes, you notice almost all the Great Lakes is surrounded by nuclear dumps and nuclear reactors, in Canada in particular, and America, of course. And there's no way to contain the radiation, and lots of it is dumped legally, despite the fact that it's criminal what they're doing, but they changed the law in their favor, and so it's legal. And they put all their nuclear waste dumps right on the coastlines. And Canada got all of its nuclear plants, except for one, on the Great Lakes, the biggest body freshwater aquifer on the entire planet, which is 1/3 of the fresh water of the entire planet. And it's 100% polluted, right? And the Fermi nuclear plant had a meltdown, I think it was 1958 or something, with a sodium reactor, same as the reactor that melted down at Santa Susana in 1959. They hid that for 50 years, by the way, till 2009, before the story came out. Was 460 times more releases than 3 Mile Island. It was equal to 460 3 Mile Islands melting down. And because it wasn't a commercial reactor, they will always say 3 Mile Island is the biggest commercial reactor that melted down in America. Which, of course, most likely is not true because, well, it's true in the sense of commercial reactors, but when you look at Hanford, look at Santa Susana, you look at the national laboratories, Los Alamos National Laboratories, the other national laboratories, quite a few of them, all had meltdowns, significant, and they're all situated above the biggest aquifers in that parts of their country. And at the Great Lakes, of course, they feed the farms for hundreds of millions of people. But that's your drinking water for the next million or billion years. That's your source of drinking water. And so why would you do that? Because the industry has never been challenged. This is one of the things we found out quite quickly a long time ago when we came out and started talking, asking questions, was we realized the industry is very, very powerful. There is no dissenting voices that are doing an educational program. So that's why we do this educational program. Japan TV anchor couldn't tell the truth about Fukushima. Shocking revelations kept secret from the public. Nuclear scientists have not trusted the information from the beginning. The worst scenario I predicted has happened. So there was dissenting voices originally. Government hid the radiation, but not a lot, not enough, and they didn't come out and acknowledge that the fuel pools in the reactor cores were ejected out of the buildings. That's a lie. There was a couple of stories that did show up, but they weren't asserting that this happened. Right? These were conjectures, which is very interesting because there wasn't an academic on the planet, period, that seen this picture and said that the fuel pools or the reactor cores were intact in reactor 3 or reactor 4. And there wasn't a university president, academic, or anywhere else on the planet. But when this picture came out over there absolutely unequivocally wasn't a nuclear student, there wasn't a nuclear scientist, a nuclear academic, a nuclear professor, anywhere on the entire planet that looked at that and said the fuel pool and the reactor cores were intact. The reactor was at the top of the buildings and so were the fuel pool. They were gone. They knew that. And they didn't come out and tell us. None of them, not one of them, has ever come out and acknowledged it. And there are people like Arnie Gunnarsson who made the racks for the assemblies for the fuel pools, and they didn't come out and tell us. So that kind of a betrayal, that kind of betrayal is the most disturbing facet of the story. In order for the lie to work, everybody had to participate in it. And so you can call it a conspiracy, and you'll be right, but it's much more than a conspiracy. Government hid the radiation simulation because it was very, very bad, because it was an extinction level event. There was 865,000 extra cancers in the first year in Japan. Showed a serious contamination over a wide area. It was a serious contamination over the entire planet. And this model is based on 20 days of Neptunium-239 dispersion plots developed with TEPCO's total release evaluation. And TEPCO, of course, refused to acknowledge reactor 3 and 4 lost their inventories, their reactor cores and their fuel pools. And so these models are just, and like this is 20 days of radioactive fallout covering the entire planet. Every government produced those particular models, but refused to acknowledge that the inventories were lost. Radiation forecasts in Japan kept secret to avoid panic in the whole society, but that's true for the whole planet. Radiation forecasts worldwide was concealed to stop avoiding panic to the entire planet, which was supposed to a panic. And so nuclear scientists didn't go to work at Fukushima. That should have been your first hint. In the media, this is pictures from the media showing the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language heading to Fukushima. The most uneducated going to do a job that demands the most educated people. And so this can only turn out very, very bad. So then they give them paper suits and march them on to an identical bus. And this is reactor 1. They put this contraption on it. This is a framing was built off-site and then assembled there by cranes because it's a nuclear wasteland. And the idea was they brought in then panels. And these panels, you can see how big they are. Massive panels. These are 190-foot, 19-story, 65-meter buildings. And these panels are held by gravity. These are Kevlar. And so they just line them up and then they lower them onto the framing and they hook onto the frame. And because they're so heavy and the way the framing is set up, it locks into place. And then you want to unlock it, you lift it up and then you move it out. And so the whole thing is done by cranes without people, even though we have seen some footage that suggests that there were some people. They would have died that day or that week. And they would have been offered enormous sums of money, and they would have been the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society, immigrants who don't speak the language. So when they put that cover on it, that's that building way over there. The next one to it is reactor 2. This one is reactor 3, what's left of it, and then reactor 4. And the green that you see, this green discoloration, that's reagents they had sprayed around the reactors so the homeless could last an extra few hours. So reactor 2 is over there. Reactor 1 is on the other side of it that I just showed you that. Reactor 3 is the stump and reactor 4. Now we have all 4 sides of reactor 4. Clearly that building didn't exist. So reactor 1 and reactor 2 are the same. These are all identical buildings. Now reactor 2, of course, looks like it's still intact, but it's 100% lost its inventory. There was reactor 3. And reactor 3 is completely gone. It ejected the reactor cores and the fuel pools. And the melted fuel from reactor 3 is the highly lethal, and all nuclear is highly lethal, right? It's 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Is the highly lethal mixed uranium plutonium oxide, and it's supposed to be the last to attempt to fuel removal, says a new plan. In 2021 they announced on the 10th anniversary, March 11th of 2021, that they had all the fuel out of the pool at reactor 3, but reactor 3, of course, doesn't even exist. The fuel and the reactor cores were ejected out of the buildings. And what was really interesting about that statement was that there was no academics came out and said, no, you didn't. Because every nuclear scientist on the planet could have come out and done a better job of telling this story than I could. And didn't. Not one of them. And what that means is you got the biggest conspiracy, the worst scenario imaginable, and the biggest betrayal of academics in human history, but also the biggest betrayal in universities, and the biggest, which are schools of mass destruction, because the nuclear industry can't exist without the universities, right? And then you have, of course, the media. And the media, like Rupert, I can't even remember, the British tycoon Rupert Murdoch, has over 600 medias, for instance. And so there's quite a few wealthy nut jobs have bought up the medias, got rid of journalism, and replaced it with public relation firms. So reactor 3 was lost, and reactor 4 at the top of each of the buildings. Now the official picture at the top of that building is this picture here. That's the official picture. Of course, there's 70 reactors, identical reactors, colors, size, scale, identical in the United States alone. But clearly that is not inside of this building. This building is a nuclear meltdown. But that's the official picture. And so in 2013, this was the version that they were promoting. Unusual amount of smoke. This is 2011. Billowing from reactor 3 and 4. Nothing to be concerned about, says TEPCO. Reactor 3 and 4. And that's reactor 3 and reactor 4. Unusual amount of smoke, but nothing to be concerned about. Again, these are nuclear meltdowns. They had detonated, lost their entire inventories. And TEPCO is not supposed to exist. At that time, was nationalized. And so this wasn't TEPCO, this was the government, the Japan government. It says TEPCO, Japan government. But it was Japan's government because this was a corporation that should have been removed immediately from the premise once this happened, because this is a cataclysmic, catastrophic event, apocalyptic event for the entire planet, and particularly for the species which will be the first to go. And don't think that humans are going to get off easy right away. It's significant effects right away to the human population worldwide. The stacks at the bottom of it were around 25 sieverts. 3 sieverts is considered a lethal dose. 25 sieverts is a lethal dose quite a distance away. And so then the question is, how could you work at the reactors when it was so radioactive you couldn't work at the stacks? Even today, you still can't work near these stacks. And these skinny stacks are where they vent the fuel pools. There was also an abnormality. So this was the original buildings, right? You can see reactor 1 and reactor 2. 190 foot, but it's very deceiving. It doesn't look like a 19-story building to you, right? It doesn't look like a 65-meter, 190-foot buildings. And then this incredible bombardment of media that claimed they were in the fuel pools of buildings that don't exist. And they're quite proud of themselves. They all got incredible. And now the majority of them making around $1 million each a year as a journalist. And their job is to destroy your future and the future of everybody else on the planet. But they walk away quite wealthy, don't they? All they got to do is tell a few lies here and there. Over 60 million Japanese irradiated by Fukushima, a nuclear expert, 2016. 50,000 square miles of Japan is highly contaminated. Many millions need to evacuate, and the government has decided to sacrifice them, and it's a crime. More than 70% of the country is contaminated by the radiation, but it's actually the whole country should be abandoned. And this was pictures taken of people that went back into their abandoned communities. They don't have any kind of protection whatsoever. And this was supermarkets she normally would have went to. And the idea was to try to shock people. This was one media that had done that, or artist rather, had done this. But then that's very harmful to the victims that went and done it, unfortunately. Another issue we're seeing, and we talk about a lot, is the incineration of the radioactive material. And what they're doing, they're incinerating, in this particular case, the sewage sludge. But there's also 1 billion pounds of radioactive contaminated waste from the tsunami that was grinded up and taken out of prefectures and incinerated. And that the radioactive fallout in one incinerator in Tokyo, 3 of the employees on a single day had heart attacks. Nearly 5,000 nuclear plant workers suffering internal radiation exposures, after visiting Fukushima. 5,000 workers suffered internal radiation exposures after Fukushima. My apologies here. Get back on track. Because first off, the internal radiation exposure, because your respirators can't filter radiation. The suits can't stop the gamma shines, the alphas, the neutrons, the beta rays, the X-rays, period. Whenever I see these paper suits, it blows my mind that, and now TEPCO said but I can't remember what year it was, 2017, 2018, I think it was, that they burned 7,000 paper suits every day in the incinerators at Fukushima. Incinerating, of course, paper suit can't protect you. And any radiations on the paper suit, when they burn it, is liberated back into the environment because you can't destroy it by incineration. Incinerating radioactive material could contaminate the environment. Again, see, in order to write the story, this is the big Japanese media, you got to put the word could there. The word could doesn't belong there. Incinerating radioactive material will unequivocally contaminate the environment. And that is a crime. If you take radiation and incinerate it, that's a crime. Period. That's a dirty bomb. By the kilogram, it's a viciously dirty bomb. And so the nuclear industry, the International Atomic Energy Agency, UNSCLEAR, IRPA, the IPRC, have all participated in making sure you can't have a future and nobody can be healthy and that the species will go into an extinction event. That was, by covering it up, this is what they ensured. By not giving it the prominence that it deserved and trying to come up with solutions and having a debate and conversation like you would for any other subject, they abused all their privileges and powers and covered it up. And now we're in real problem. We're in real trouble. 70% of the children tested are contaminated with radioactive cesium. And if they're contaminated with radioactive cesium, they're contaminated with the uranium, they're contaminated with the plutonium, they're contaminated with the americium, the neptunium, the strontium, they're contaminated by endless isotopes. It can't just be cesium. And the fact that the majority of the stories will only acknowledge cesium and will make the conjecture that that is the only one that matters is frightening. Because typically a journalist is somebody who might live on your street or in your community. And so now you have to look at them as serial killers and mass murderers because that's who they are. Not maybe, but that's who they are. By not warning you, not having a conversation, not being open and honest, and not doing any education whatsoever, only telling you it was like a banana and a potato chip and walking in sunshine now for 80 years is a death sentence for humanity and the 8 million species. It's a death sentence. Government session reveals 400,000 times normal. There is no such thing as a normal radioactive xenon-133, by the way. Levels in Chiba. So they could be talking about 200 million atoms per square meter or 10 million atoms per square meter because of the way they're framing that narrative. And the actual figure may be much higher. Well, no, it's much higher. And we're only acknowledging xenon-133. You're going to have just as much krypton-85, which is a nasty isotope. Same as xenon. It's a nasty, burns a hole through the insects and birds and mammals and animals, lungs and children, and then it sequesters in the bones. And it decays into a very dangerous isotope. So this employee right here, this homeless person in his paper suit, he would have died that afternoon or that night at latest if he didn't die within 20 minutes of this shot. And he's in there spraying a reagent, this is green reagent, which binds to the fuel particles that are all over the site and stops them from splitting atoms into the environment. And so nobody knows how many thousands and thousands of homeless people suffered this fate. But we do know from Chernobyl the catastrophic effects, despite the fact that they covered that up successfully. And so these people here, clearly, there was thousands and thousands of the so-called Fukushima 50s. The Fukushima 50 was a fiction, meant to lull you into complacency and pump up the nuclear industry as if it's full of heroes when it's not. There are no nuclear scientists at Fukushima. There are no nuclear academics at Fukushima. These are cowards. And these are the worst humans imaginable, and they're the biggest threat to the future of humanity. And that you need, and it's difficult, I get that, but you need to make a stand. You're the power. You're the incredible power, and you don't understand it. And so anybody doing this job here would have died that day, or certainly that week. This is a control room, for instance. It was 7 years before they shot this picture. It was 7 years before they could go into the control room. And I remember the story clearly. And they were only allowed in there for a couple of minutes. As far as I know, they never went back in that room again. It's a nuclear wasteland. But they were trying to make it look like the plant was gaining ground. And they released this particular picture. Wearing paper suits, and you see them stood up with their hands on their hips. They literally don't know nothing about nuclear. These are the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language, getting a photo shoot to prop up the nuclear industry. And they would have been incredibly sick by the end of the day, and if they didn't die. Reactor 5 and Reactor 6. Now last night, I don't know if we covered Reactor 6. Yeah, did we cover Reactor 6 last night? Now, we have worked tirelessly for many, many years. And on top of that, we do research expeditions, very extensive ones. And there's a lot of energy and time and effort, monetary, and thought goes into what we do because we're limited and we have to make it work every single time, right? Let me see if I can bring up Reactor 6. Because in 2021, on the 10th, in the year of the 10th anniversary, there were 736 pictures released. And there's a couple of sets of pictures that drew you a line to the common spent fuel pool. There's a series of 7 or 8, 9, 10 pictures or something. And then it drew you a line again in another direction with, I think it was 15 or 20 pictures. But ultimately, the pictures ended at the fuel pool. And whoever released the pictures were trying to warn you about something. This was released at TEPCO. I found it on a Japanese site. And when I translated it, there was all these links there. And I still couldn't figure out what the story was. And so I went over, and it was TEPCO's website, and I started downloading all the pictures. It was 736 pictures. And I've done an entire presentation several times on this website. Recently, too, this year, in 2024, I had done another presentation. So the common spent fuel pool is right beyond Reactor 4. And the fuel is missing. The common spent fuel pool was clearly had a meltdown. And they acknowledged that. There we go. The common spent fuel pool. And then Reactor 6 was also completely pixelated. Renewed nuclear chain reaction feared at the spent fuel storage pool. A renewed one. So they acknowledged in that statement that there was already a chain reaction. And if you have a chain reaction in the fuel pool, it's not like a part of your house caught fire. It's burning at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures right away. Everything caught fire. So it's a total loss in the inventories. Now, some people will argue, well, Dana, the building looks like it's still intact. Yes, and so does Reactor 2, which is not very far away. But that's because it went China syndrome, because it was such a big inventory, it went deep into the earth right away. And I'm not sure if I can dig up reactor 6. Let me give it a try though for a few seconds. Oh yeah, we'll find it down here. Let's bring it over. Well, this is not ideal what I'm doing here, but that's reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just bear with me 1 second, I'll get on it. And so this was a pictures from a drone. Okay, I got what I'm looking for right here coming up. This was pictures from a drone that when I zoomed in on it, I started noticing all this stuff that was pixelated. It was pixelated. Bear with me. Here we go. And on the coastline, and I remember people attacking me when I was talking about Fukushima, showing this picture in particular. People were saying I was a lawyer. This was the dry cask storage. And so you can see that tank up there. And this is reactor 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are that way. And reactor 5 and 6 are up here. And so I zoomed in on some of these pictures. But as you keep zooming that direction, you can see reactor 5 and 6. So you can see the common spent fuel pool. You can see that tank up right there, but you can see reactor 5 and 6. And so when I get closer to reactor 5 and 6, I realize reactor 6, which is the last one, and the pump house and the stack are completely pixelated out. Why would they be pixelated out? Why did they release these pictures in 2011 on the 10th anniversary? I'm sorry, the year of the 10th anniversary. That's quite troubling. Okay, so they picked up 30 million one-ton bags. Now we're getting down into the section of the radioactive fallout. So California, in a single bed of kelp, was 40 million atoms of iodine-131. Remember, there was 20 million atoms of particles, rather, which is absurd, of iodine-131 per liter in the rain fallout in British Columbia. And it was 220 million atoms of iodine-129 in Ottawa, Canada, study, which is the capital of Canada. And this was persistent for many, many weeks of persistent fallout, which meant you were a continuous ongoing nuclear meltdown to create that kind of an inventories. And because they can find the iodine-131 and the iodine-132, then it's typically a mathematical equation will extrapolate the other isotopes. There was another study of 1,500 atoms of radioactive sulfur per cubic meter of air in the California air. These are all hot particles. And the sulfur is liberated from the salt water that they were spraying on the reactors because they didn't have any fresh water. And it was only symbiotic to fresh water, salt water being sprayed, because you're supposed to use a very special borated water so you can't have a chain or a criticality or a chain reaction. But what happens is the sulfur, when it's hitting these enormous temperatures, liberate, and I knew this in the 50s when they were doing ocean detonations and destroying that ecosystem in the Marshall Islands. There's still 1 million square kilometers that are still too radioactive to be habitable in a 2019 study. And so the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs are created where the sulfur is liberated into spherical balls, and that's able to ingest uranium, plutonium, americium, the curium isotopes, by the way, which are the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods, are ingested into the sulfur peroxide hydrogen and makes buckyballs, spherical shapes. And now you have something that's very mobile. Doesn't need a jet stream to travel around the entire planet. and is not typically solutable with water. And these are hot particles. And so any species that is in proximity to this is getting massive blasting. And so this will sterilize the species and you. And of course, the female species are born with all their eggs, so it destroys that integrity right away. And the female, of course, of all species are 4 times, including humans, are 4 times more susceptible to radiation than the male species, which is the most frightening statement conceivable. University of Texas researcher, the Fukushima release was so great the radioactive aerosols in Washington were up to 100,000 times normal. It was 450,000 atoms per square meter, or cubic centimeter, or cubic meter of air. Celebrated physician, Fukushima has humanity on the brink of a possible worldwide nuclear holocaust from radioactive fallout. And the world as we know it has changed, and the effects on our health and the species for the average person is incomprehensible. A very high concentrations of hot particles in the Pacific Northwest during April and May, including plutonium and americium. Of course, typically you hear about the Cesium-137, right? But that's one they can find, the same as the iodines. And then you'd extrapolate all the other isotopes. And so this was a model based on 40 days of emissions made by NOAA of the radioactive fallout. And this was based on a very flawed model that was only using a fraction of the inventories that were lost. And based on 40 days. Okay, so let me go back to this one. Very high concentrations of hot particles in the Pacific Northwest. And so what we do, let me get going here. And, you know, I was actually dreading doing this show tonight because these are such difficult stories to tell. And anybody who's around regularly knows that about me. It's very heartbreaking. It's a very personal story for me. Now, your media pretended they were in the buildings that don't even exist. If that doesn't frighten you, what actually does, I wonder? There was 1 million atoms of the xenon-133 on the ground per square meter in North America, which meant you're supposed to abandon North America. But there was also 20 million particles of iodine-131 per liter rainfall, which meant you were supposed to abandon North America. There was also 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129 in the rain, which meant you're supposed to abandon North America with any of these, let alone all of them. And so before I can get into the research that we've done down here, let me talk about what I've done on the West Coast for a minute. So this is a map of the West Coast from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. And so each of these arrows are representing fractions of the coastline. And there's 27,000 islands. And if you visit every island, one island a day would take you 71 years. If you never took a day off, it would take you 71 years to visit all the islands. And so what I done was I went to all the pinch points where the ocean has to go through to get to the interior islands. And we approached this for years and years and years. For 6 years, and the reason we went back for 6 years is because the first year we discovered it was an extinction event and we needed to see if the species recovered. And this is what it typically looked like on any given day. This is your typical day. Now remember, we know the radioactive fallout. We have all the models from all the institutions. I don't know if we got them all, but we got the majority of them. This plume model is based on 19 and a half days of radioactive fallout. And so we went back year after year because when we went there, the species over there to your left were gone. There was nothing left. So you had to go back year after year, like it or not, to see if the species recovered. So originally we thought we can just go up and we see some damage. Because I used to dive this whole coastline. I used to be a commercial diver. I used to pick 20,000 of them a day if I was working at that particular industry. And I worked at a lot of different industries. Food was my harvesting was my favorite. It was amazing. So this is what it looked like every day, everywhere I went. This was normal to your left, and to your right, it's nothing left. Just a few unhealthy species, very tiny mussels, maybe. When everything was typically, you can see all the mussels in your picture to the left, right? There was incredible diversity of sponges, around 84 species of sponges. Each came in multiple vibrant colors. There was 700 algae, kelps, and in the 700 algae was 5,500 invertebrates without the backbones. There was 78 species of sea anemones. Each species came in multiple vibrant colors, and they were the dominant species in the tidal zones. If you were deep in the interior where there wasn't that much wildlife, it would be saturated with the sea anemones and many different species, and each species multiple vibrant colors. 76 species of starfish, and each species came in multiple vibrant colors. Beautiful. Then there was the clams. There was the razorback clams, the little necks, the manillas. There was the oysters. There was the scallops. There was the small scallops, the large scallops. There was the gooey ducks. There was the periwinkles, the snails. There was the mussels. There was this absurd amount of snails, different species. And it wasn't unusual to see 1,000 or 10,000 on a rock. And every rock would be, that was out of, up close to the high tide line. It would be fully exposed at low tide with a 19-foot typically tide exchange. And then at the top of the tide lines was around 30,000 species of insects. And I thought of them as my friends because I worked in that environment for 100 days at a time. And those species were completely wiped out. So we went back year after year to see if the species to your left recovered. And we never done this. I was doing 7 shows a week on headlines. And we had so much documentation that we launched the research expeditions. And the nuclear meltdowns, that radioactive fallout, had destroyed the ecosystem, period. And this documentation is unassailable. And this is why you see them pretending they're in a building that don't exist. The journalists pretending they're in a building that don't exist because the radioactive fallout is real. We've done the research. And I can tell you right now that I stayed out there for 4 to 5 months a year each year to document the entire coastline because we covered this documentation, this radioactive fallout extensively. Okay. It was amazing. Now there's nothing left. And so the nuclear industry realizes that if you find me and gets educated, that you're a formidable opponent. That you're not going to be hoodwinked anymore and you're not going to tolerate this industry for another second. Very high concentrations of hot particles in the Pacific Northwest. So now, I just got to do some prep work for you. I'm going to show you research pictures from Friday and hopefully for Sunday. Now Friday's pictures are coming up in a second for you. I just got to open up another window. I'm going to show you the bird species for this province. We're currently in Newfoundland and what's known as Labrador. I'm going to bring that up any moment now. All of this. Here we go. Hope I get it right. Okay. So bird watchers in Newfoundland and Labrador can enjoy observing 373 bird species. And 204 birds are considered the native birds. They're here all year long. And 160 species, rather, of birds. And 166 irregular visitors. But it's the biggest migratory path on the entire planet. It's a total of 427 species. And 35, this is a collection of 35 of the highly visible species. Now, I've never seen any of these species in the last 3 years except for 2 or 3. This species here, maybe, the pine. No sparrows, no finches. The northern fulmar, a very popular species down here. Beautiful yellow warbler. I think I've seen one this year and several last year. The common turs, we only seen one last year, none this year. The morning wobbler. These are insect eaters. They don't show up anymore. The common murre, 2 years ago, we had over 1 million of them died on our coastline of starvation in the dead of winter, and I was camping out in a tent in the dead of winter. The black-capped chickadee, I got pictures of him, one of them, or 3 of them on Sunday. The black-legged kittiwake, they had no surviving fledglings last year on the little colonies and they live on a cliff's edge. It's an open cliffs. That's where they're like little seagulls, right? And they had no fledglings last year that survived, and I didn't see any eggs. And because they're right on a cliff face, and they're like an inverted cliff face that hangs out, so it's very difficult for anything to come down from above and steal their eggs. No, and now we have the only species that is proliferating is the cormorants, and they're not indigenous to the province. They don't belong here. We did see last year a couple of hundred of the puffins. Now, I'm planning a trip down to a puffin colony in the next few days. And let's come back over now to pictures. Let me see if I can get that to work for me. So these first pictures are going to be from Friday. And I got, let me get rid of that for 1 second. It's 1,591 pictures there. So we're not going to get through all of them. And sometimes I took a lot of pictures. And so this was where we're headed for Green Harbor down towards Winterton and Old Purlican area. And so that don't matter. That was one of the places down there to get references. And what we're looking for is seabirds. Now we have the biggest migratory spot on the planet for seabirds. There's around 46 million migratory seabirds coming here every year for millions of generations. And the bottom of these bays are prime spots for these migratory birds to show up. Typically, you expect to see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds in each direction you look. And this is a sand berm. This is salt water right here, but this is a sand berm. So this is like a little where the sea comes over. And but I quickly go around the coastline, and then we'll get the other pictures from over there. But there's no species of any species seabirds here. And you can see it's just stunningly gorgeous. And I'm not going to try to get through everything individually, because normally, like in my spare time, I go through every picture and I'm looking for even a bird. And so I'll go down and have the original look, but then I'll zoom in when I get home and see if I missed anything, right? And we're not finding any of the birds. Okay, so now I'm moved over about a quarter mile, and now we're in the bay. This is a community. So you'd expect to see some residential birds here, right? And that's some seagulls. Some residential, what we call sewage gulls, basically, scavengers. And it's the same thing on the shoreline. The tide is going down, and you're not seeing much kelp washed up, which is pretty interesting. And then you got a seagull right there. See how they stand out? Right, he stands out, don't he? So when you're looking from right here, you can spot that seagull, can't you? And that's what I mean. If there is birds there, you will see them yourself, right? You won't need me to point it out for you. See how he stands out, that seagull behind me? No matter what you do, he stands up because he's the only thing out there. And even in this picture where you're looking a long way, he'll stand out. So if there was other birds nearby, and when I zoom in like this, you're going to see them, correct? See, there's another seagull there. Now, this is low tide, but we're not seeing seagulls down feeding at the low tide. But we don't care about seagulls because seagulls are scavengers. They feed at the low tide, but they also feed at McDonald's. And that's where you typically go to look for them at low tide is McDonald's because there's nothing there for them to eat. So this is Green's Harbor. And so here you got a couple of seagulls. And so they stand out. If there's any other birds there, they're going to stand out, right? And that's the beauty of finding the seagull, is you know they're going to stand out. So any other bird will definitely stand out. And if there's another bird there, you will see it yourself. And so you got a bird on a rock. Has he got 3 legs? What the hell is going on there? Or is that 2 seagulls on that rock? Am I missing something? There must be 2 seagulls. Let me zoom in on the next picture. Or is it a 2-headed seagull? I don't know. Because it won't surprise me. But in the tidal zones, the tide is still going down, but in the tidal zones, you're not seeing any color whatsoever. You're just seeing kelp weed. And this is because of perpetual radioactive fallout. And we're a long way away. We're 7,000 miles away. But the radioactive fallout covers the entire planet in a very short time. So here's some seagulls on the beach. See how they stand out? And it's too early. Oh, so that's a sandpiper right there. It's hard to tell when you're looking at it, but I'm pretty sure that's a sandpiper. And that's a kittiwake right there. We call them tickleasses down here. That's just a traditional name. We also call something we don't know what it is a chummy. So don't worry about it. Yeah, so there's 2 sandpipers right there. It's very difficult to see, I know. But I can recognize them. It's just that shape, right? But there's another seagull way over there, see that? And so I'm just trying to lay a foundation so when I'm going through these pictures, that you got something you can relate to. Now these are sewage gulls, basically. They're I'm not going to go into detail of what they're getting from the sewage, but notice how the birds stand out. And so that over there is a buoy. They'll pick that up and put it on the bow of the boat to tie a boat on. So this kind of stuff stands out. But what I've done was I was taking just a panoramic view, and we only got kelp cabbage, or kelp weed rather, which is the most prolific kelp on the entire planet. And it's not very healthy looking at all. But again, it's in a harbor. But this is open harbor that's looking directly out into the open ocean. So there's a significant exchange of seawater right here. It's not a stagnant bay, for instance. And again, if there was a seagull or any other bird here, it's going to stand out. And this is where you expect the migratory birds, used to, not expect, but this is where you're guaranteed to find herds of different species would show up here in groups. And there you can see a couple of seagulls. They stand out. but there's no other species. Now, we know there's 427 species supposed to be here this time of the year. We know there's supposed to be 46 million migratory birds. This is their route. They can't deviate. If they're not here, they're gone. And even if there's a little breeze of wind, if there's a bird there, he stands out like a sore thumb. Again, I'm still in Green Harbor. And what I done was I took as far as I know I did anyway, I took a picture of the community just before I started snapping the other pictures. Yeah, and this is the opposite side of the harbor. So I took one side of the harbor, then the bottom of the harbor, and now the outside edge of the harbor before we get to the next one, which I think is Heart's Delight, I think. And this is right out to the mouth of the harbor where I'm to now. And so we're seeing the same thing. We're not seeing one bird or two birds, let alone groups of birds, or ducks, or cormorants, or common or turs, or puffins. We're not seeing zero puffins. We're not seeing any murres or razorbills, or we're never seen any chickadees on the drive. No common turs, no wobblers, no sparrows or goosebeaks or northern fulmars, and the Atlantic puffin is typically everywhere, and they'd nest on those cliffs. No sparrows, common murres or wobblers again, or the pines, or the razorbills, or the thrusts, or the Arctic terns, which are normally massive amounts, or the Swainson's thrust, the spotted sandpiper. Now, we've seen two, right? I believe that's what we were looking at, but the picture was pretty degraded at that distance. And the morning wobbler, the sparrows, the great black-backed gull, that's a juvenile. They're deer, but we're not at the colonies right now. Black and white wobblers, chickadees. Now, we got some pictures of chickadees in one spot on Sunday. And all we're seeing is some of the gulls, right? But we definitely should see murres, and particularly common murres, and the razorbills, and the kittiwakes. You expect to see that. You would definitely expect to see puffins. You would expect to see finches and sparrows and robins, and we're not seeing none of that. And so let me go through a little bit more of this. When we get to the next sign, now I shot videos of each of these places. So let me go down and find out. Maybe we'll play one of them for us. And then we'll go back to the headlines. And just bear with me 1 second here. Just bear with me. Save you the boredom. We're going to dig up the video from, because we're talking about, I'm a long way into the videos. Here we go. All right, let me bring that up. I'm going to put on the headphones so I don't end up drowning everybody out. It might be windy, so I'll turn the volume down right away. I'm in Greens Harbor. So on the other side of the little berm is salt water, the open ocean. And a lot of times you're going to see birds along this shoreline. This is salt water, but a lot of times you're going to see, because it's good shelter for the birds and that, they love these spots. And we never see birds lately in these spots, like migratory birds, seabirds. Okay, so that was the first part of Green Bay. Bear with me. Will it jump to my next video? No. Gonna make me work for every video here. That's okay. I think it's still Green Harbor. I just done some shots with the big lens, and there's a blue boat over there, etc. We just showed you down shore, and there's nothing in the tidal zones whatsoever. It's pretty calm. There's just some local seagulls, residential seagulls, and we're in the bottom of the bay. I can't even remember. I'll know when I tell the story, but yeah, Green Harbor. Beautiful day, and there's nothing here but seagulls and a couple of crows. There's no little tiny birds zipping around, by the way, finches or starlings or robins. Total silence, no boats in the harbor. But noticing that for quite a few years, you never see any boats out in the harbor. It's bizarre. It's heartbreaking too, and I think I got one more video of the outside. The next one would be, I think it will be. It's the 23rd of August, 2024. My apologies, that's a little windy. So that's I showed you the pictures of this already, right? Okay, let's come back over to that window. We'll come back to that in a little tiny bit here. We got to finish off those pictures till we get to the next spot. So let's come back to that, because otherwise I'll lose track, right? So let's get through the rest of the pictures of Green Harbor. What was that I seen there? Oh, that was a rock off the point. And so that's looking back into the bay now, across the bay. Oh, that's the Cormorant taking off. Let me go back here. He was just starting to get up and go there. Picking up a bit of speed. A lone Cormorant. They're usually in groups though, right? And thank goodness the camera is a good camera, because I'm really bad with cameras. And so this kind of just does everything on its own. Now the camera mode I'm set to is sports mode, because I'm doing a lot of panning and a lot of shots. And what I was trying to do was just document the whole bay as much as I could. And this is typical of any academic doing these vast surveys. And then you look at it after and see if you missed anything. And I've looked at it, and I'm pretty confident I didn't miss any flocks of migratory birds. But it was really unique because it was pretty good weather. It was very hot. It was probably 80, 85 degrees. And in the communities and out on the shorelines and coastlines, beautiful spots for small birds. You would definitely expect to see oodles and oodles of small birds chasing insects, for instance. Because you know how so that's the bottom of the bay where I showed you those pictures from earlier. Now we're coming back to where we're on to. And so now I would have moved to the next community down the coastline. So you can see now there's another small sandpiper right there by the looks of it. I could be wrong, but let me go back, see if there's any change in it. No, there's nothing there, only a couple of seagulls. But the shoreline is eradicated. There is nothing in there. There's no shells in there, right? That's the most insane part of that story. Not just starfish or any other species, but there's no shellfish there. There's no shells whatsoever. Now, we did find in one spot some shells that were collected by somebody left on just up a little above the high tide line, and those pictures will come up eventually. And they were green sea urchins, I think shells mostly. But it was, you didn't see any shells, you didn't see any mussels growing on the rocks. Oh, here we are, snails. There was a couple of places where we found snails right at the high tide line. And then as the tide went down, we didn't see the snails in the deeper water on the rocks, but we did see a couple of spots. And because of, I'm just trying to get to the next place now because there's not really much else to see in these pictures, right? We'll go to the next spot over here. Oh, this spot here. That's the. You remember when I walked out on the wharf and played the video, but it was really windy and you didn't have the audio? That was this spot here. That was right. That's still Greens Harbor. Port to Port. Port to Port? I don't know. Green Harbor Port, I get it. Okay, so the next place was Whiteway, so I'll come back to that in a little tiny bit. And again, because you're stopping on the highway. There's somebody walking up the highway there. Oh yeah, that's right, I remember that person. I was worried that I might make them nervous because we're strangers. We pull over in this little community and get out of the car. I don't think they're worried about it. But I remember thinking to myself, I'll get back in the car and get moving again so we don't make the poor people nervous. Very high concentrations of hot particles. Let's come back over to the pole for a minute. Let me bring up that page. To the pole, right here. Did nuclear scientists always know that the radioactive fallout would break the food chain and cause an LE, which is an extinction level event? And clearly they did. There's no way that they didn't. And they didn't cover up Fukushima because it's like a banana and a potato chip for walking in sunshine, right? A very high concentrations of hot particles in the Pacific Northwest. In Tokyo, radioactive tap water. Now, Tokyo, you've seen 29 million atoms per square meter of Cesium-137 after a rainfall. So it's zero possibility that the water wasn't compromised. It was zero possibilities. And we know the aquifers, there's a lot of stories about the aquifers, which are for 36 million people, by the way. It was incredibly radioactive. In fact, they were passing out bottled water for children and suggesting that everybody else was okay, but radiation doesn't work that way. And they were trying to avoid congenital malformations showing up in the near future by doing that routine, which apparently didn't work. Scientists, the very lowest levels of radiation are harmful to life. And we have to rethink our exposure levels from nuclear plants. We have to rethink our lowest levels of radiation are harmful to life. We have to rethink exposure levels from nuclear plants. Well, I mean, that's being awful political correct to frame the narrative that way. Surface forecast shows radioactive xenon-133 lingering over Florida. 133. So when you say Fukushima potential release from 0 to 100 meters above sea level, March the 21st to March the 25th, this was the Norwegian Institute of Air Research. And they say, although xenon is not toxic, its compounds are highly toxic. Again, this is simply insane to suggest that these are not toxic, because they're pulsing energy at the speed of light in your body. They're wrecking your chromosomes, your DNA, and your cells, and the birds and animals and mammals and everything else with replicating cells, right? But you're talking about 450,000 times a detection levels pre-nuclear meltdowns. So you could be talking about 2 or 3 million atoms per square meter. not just cancer, how low doses of radiation causes heart diseases and strokes. And just let me give you an example of that, because there was an unusual story showed up 2012, I believe it was. And because we have such a prolific amount of documentation, sometimes it takes me a few moments to dig up. Extreme increase in mortality caused by heart diseases in Fukushima, and that the death rates might give the creeps to some people. The death rates might give the creeps to some people. Well, when you have a spike of 12.5%, 12,695 extra people dying in a single month of heart attacks, these are incredible numbers. And then you also have a spike in cancers and a spike in cardiac diseases. But you had 6 in 10 children with diabetes. You had 14,200 children out of 100,000 needed open heart surgery. You had 13,646 out of 38,000 children with thyroid tumors. And like when you put all this together, you're talking about radioactive hormones permanently for all the insects, birds, mammals, animals, and humans. And you're talking about radioactive stem cells for everybody, particularly the developing species. And where the female species are 4 times more vulnerable than the male species, the quickest way to destroy a species is radioactive fallout. And then the deplorable, sadistic, the terrorist slash pro-nuclear community, these unprincipled, atrocious, appalling traitors continue to grow food in the 14 prefectures that were banned by 55 countries. Now, Canada moved all restrictions after 93 days. So a lot of food was shipped to Canada in the first number of years because they couldn't really ship it to very many other places. Canada had done that on purpose, poisoned the entire population of the country. And so there's explosions of dementia and autism and diabetes and Down syndrome and schizophrenia. There's heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. There's this incredible host of illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. And they're actually, this is media's pictures from the mainstream medias, harvesting food alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation in a nuclear wasteland where no one lives, right within sight basically of the ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns. You know, and sometimes I say to myself, what would the industry do if we didn't exist, if they didn't have any opposition whatsoever? If there was, because we're the closest there is to a checks and balance. And we're not much of a checks and balance. But we're enough that any policymakers, any investors that do find me and do watch my material, I make sense. And I provide the missing link that is omitted by the industry. And now when you come across one of my videos, then what ends up happening is they're immediately switched off from nuclear. They lose their enthusiasm, let's put it that way. So we are making a dent. I know this because I've talked to a number of them over the last 13 years that have told me so, right? I might not understand that, but I am making a huge difference. But I do understand it. I'm not doing this because it's easy, because it absolutely is not. And I'm not doing it because it's fun, because it unequivocally is not. And those research expeditions, which I'm going to zip back over to in about 2 minutes, are zero fun. They're satisfying because we gather up the documentation, and at the end of summer, I'm going to present you with a map of everywhere I covered, and that's going to blow your mind that it is stripped and how much I think you'll be quite surprised at how much I've actually covered. 45% of kids in the Fukushima prefecture survey had thyroid exposures to radiation. No, they all did. You can't just have 45%. Up to 50 millisieverts, which is 50,000 microsieverts per year, equivalent for 1 year old. I mean, 14.2% of every 100,000 live births, which is 14,200 children, need open heart surgery every year in Japan across the entire country because of congenital malformations, because of Fukushima. That is catastrophic in every sense of the word. That is not tenable or sustainable. And 50,000 microsieverts is absurd. I mean, a absurd number, by the way. And the biggest betrayal, again, is the International Atomic Energy Agency, United Nations, admitted there is no such thing as a safe level, and that their standards are based on bananas and potato chips, not nuclear meltdowns and radioactive fallout. Their standards are not based on man-made radiation. And their current demon, degenerate monster Rafael Grossi. The International Atomic Energy Radiation Standards are merely an international consensus. Studies have not found a safe level of the radiation. A single atom, and you put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. A single one of them in your body is pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. Your body attacks it for the rest of your life, or the bird or insect or mammal or animal, whatever it's inside of. It attacks it for the rest of its life with white blood cells and builds a tumor around it. And the fact that it pulses energy every second is wrecking chromosomes, DNA, and cells and everything else, lesions to your organs, means your body has to try to repair that every second, because every second there's another pulse. And so you have an absurd amount of white blood cells for every atom in your body that's anthropogenic, man-made. And so the cause and effect is catastrophic again. So imagine on insects the significance. Imagine, because that's what we're talking about humans. Now imagine what it's like for insects and fledglings and little small fish or little small frogs or little small. Well, the insects are the food chain for many of the species, right? Or all the species, certainly. I also cited a study from the National Academy of Science which said that 1 of the 5 workers would suffer from cancer exposed to what the International Atomic Energy Agency deemed an allowable radiation levels. 1 in 5 would get cancer if they went by the International Atomic Energy Agency standards. Which meant everybody will get some kind of cancer from the radiation that's emitted from the fuel pools alone. The disgusting fuel pools at every nuclear reactor are the biggest threat to humanity on top of that, and the 8 million species. Excuse me. Let me get back on track here. How are we doing for time? We're still doing okay. We're going to go back to the pictures now. We're not going to get through everything tonight, but we're going to pick up tomorrow night with what we don't get tonight. And we're going to try to bomb our way through these pictures and articulate what we saw and what we didn't see. And I'm under enormous amount of stress. Unbelievable. And a lot of that is self-imposed stress, but it's not. We're trying desperately to fight for humanity so we can have a future. This is our job. This is our calling. This is the result of what we do. That's the ultimate outcome of what we're trying to do, is fight for the right to have a life on this planet, for anything. Because radiation destroys everything. It's an unbelievable evil entity, and that the academic community was well aware of it in the 40s, let alone the 50s and 60s, and covered up the significance of it. And now look at us. Look at us now. So children with over 11 atoms a kilogram start to see heart problems. But Japan allegedly was shipping food at 100 atoms a kilogram. But children with 11 atoms per a kilogram, which, how do you detect that, see? Because that was already here before Fukushima. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 atoms a kilogram. Irreversible heart damage. You can look up Chernobyl hearts if you want to really comprehend the significance of that. And here's another headline that really, it boggles my mind, but I never get used to this stuff. And I've been covering it for years and years and years, but I still can't get used to that kind of evil. The officials made it mandatory to use Fukushima rice in school lunches. They picked up 30 million one-ton bags of radiation there, so that quantifies it's a radioactive wasteland, no matter how you try to spin that. It's like Russian roulette. Only 10% of the school lunches in Fukushima were tested for radiation, and that the officials didn't even know testing equipment was available. This is complacency. This is brain damage, right? Obesity rates doubled in the first year, which is a marker of radiation brain damage. And now we're seeing it symmetrically worldwide, aren't we? Diachi Elementary had 4 million atoms a square meter of cesium in the soil sample from a school in Chiba, 20 kilometers from Tokyo. Which means you're supposed to abandon that. Six in 10 Fukushima children tested have diabetes, and the head of the Tokyo area medical clinic says we are expecting diabetes in children from Fukushima radiation. This is as clear as you could ever. It's horrifying, actually. And that the Geiger counters, you put 3,000 alone in Fukushima City, and the equivalent in Koriyama City, we're measuring in microsieverts. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you measure in physical atoms? And atoms, they pulse energy, that's described as a becquerel. So you see those connotations of a becquerel? 4 million becquerels. Basically, it's 4 million atoms pulsing energy every second. And I'll always call them atoms because that's the proper way to articulate. You don't articulate it by energy, pulses of energy. It's airborne, so it's physical atoms because it's airborne. It didn't get there, it's not shooting energy from Fukushima plant all the way to here. It's radioactive fallout floating around, you're breathing it in. It's hovering alongside of you, right? And so to not abandon these places, which are extraordinary levels. Japan's radioactive children will be fine. Thyroid glands only emitting 35 millisieverts. I mean, this is not only emitting, this is unprecedented emissions. This is 35,000 microsieverts. And this is New Scientist. We've done entire shows on New Scientist propaganda. It's terrifying. By the way, 50 atoms a kilogram. You put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, you can't see it. 50 per kilogram in your diet, in your bread, in your potatoes, in your fruit or whatever, lead irreversible lesions in your vital organs. Try wrapping your mind around that statement. Irreversible lesions in the adults. In children, it's irreversible damage to their hearts and irreversible lesions to their vital organs. In adults, it's considered just one of the many adverse side effects. I mean, there was 865,000 extra cancers in the first year. Not everybody got health care. Not everybody was diagnosed. And cancer isn't the only thing. But my goodness, an extra spike. Now, 35.8% of Fukushima children have thyroid tumors. And it was 13,646 out of 38,000. It used to be 1 in a million. So when you scale it up to a million, it's 358,000 out of a million when it used to be 1 in a million. But what it also means, because you're talking about the thyroid produces the hormones that regulates every function in your body. So you're talking about radioactive hormones in the developing children. So imagine how significant that is. And then significant, with that much going on in humans, clearly every animal and insect is going to have a significant more issues. Radioactive xenon-133 in Washington was 450,000 times. So then that meant you had just as much xenon or krypton, just as much cesium, just as much iodine, just as much plutonium, americium, plutonium, strontium in the same samples. That's what, every time you see a study on a certain isotopes, you extrapolate the other isotopes out of it. That's what they're going to do, see? Okay, just in, new study reveals deaths and mutations increase sharply from exposures to Fukushima contamination, especially at low doses. And small levels of cesium may be significantly toxic. In other words, things don't look good for animals living around Fukushima. But the French study showed 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137 in North America from the French government. Let me see if I can whip that up. Oh, by the way, as part of the equation tonight, you notice in the description, I talk about all nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools. Well, they're all also surrounded by farms. Almost every single nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms as far as you can see. The fuel pools can't contain the radiation, and so the farms will whisk it away from the site and into your supermarkets, and by proxy now into your refrigerators and into your loved ones' bodies, where they'll be compromised in increments over time. And remember, 11 atoms per kilogram will cause problems for children's hearts. 50 atoms a kilogram is irreversible heart damage and irreversible lesions to their organs. And for adults, 50 atoms a kilogram is irreversible lesions to their vital organs. These are just a fraction of the illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries that'll manifest from consuming this stuff. So if you're buying food from any of the 414 power plants worldwide in that within a 100-mile range of, you're getting incredible doses. And it's been going on for how long? 60 years or longer? It's a sadistic industry. This is a sadistic industry. Even tiny amounts of radioactive food made caterpillars become abnormal butterflies. So the scientists had collected plant material from around Fukushima, took it to Tokyo, and fed it to pale grass blue butterfly caterpillars. And when the caterpillars turned into butterflies, they suffered from mutations and were more likely to die early. And even if they had only eaten a small amount of the artificial cesium, in other words, things don't look good for the animals. Things don't look good for the animals. So I'm going to bring you back over to the research expeditions we carried out the weekend on Friday and Sunday. Saturday was spent getting ready for the research expeditions. Bird watching in Newfoundland and Labrador can observe a total of 427 species confirmed in Newfoundland. We've only found 3 species. If you don't count seagulls, we've only found 3 species this summer. And so wait, just bear with me 1 second, actually. Because we're running out of time as we talk, right? Let me find another way to do this. Okay, we'll hang on here. Let's come back over here. I'm going to play this next video. I think the audio is okay on this one. You can see a couple of ducks in that one. They're residential ducks, unfortunately, so. I'm in White Way. August 23rd, 2024. See the seagulls up there. This is our first peek at the shoreline. I just It's going to take pictures with the small lens and then pictures with the zoom. So I'm going to shoot all of this with the small lens, the one we're looking at now. Then I'll come right back over here with the zoom and go along the shoreline. I'll come right back over and shoot with this big zoom lens. That island. Shoreline, very important stuff. Let me see here now. Right there? Yeah. So that video I shot was Waitway, right? So that's Waitway right there. And that whole highway, is like that the whole time. No sparrows, no birds, nothing flying across the road, nothing landing. And Jane's Lane. It's a typical outport story. So this little spot down here, that's so I think this is the big lens. You can see a couple of markers way out there in the bay, right? But if there's any birds, and you've seen this in the earlier pictures, they'll stand out. They just stand out, right? Nice and calm, right? So the seagulls, for instance, they stand out. So if there was other birds there, they would stand out also. So we see, I don't know if that's some other bird right there with them guys. Could be. But generally, what you're looking at is pretty dismal, right? And if you look at the shoreline, there is no shells. Like, there's no mussels on the rocks, for instance. There's no algae on the rocks on top of that. Everything that's out of the water at low tide is sterilized from radioactive fallout. And then people, they clean their fish here, right? On these little tables. And so you expect to see all kinds of insects. In fact, you expect, when you come out here at low tide, you expect to be harassed by insects. And they're also missing. And so when I zoom in, this is the big lens. And the kelp doesn't look... Now, this is open bay. The ocean is not very far away. The open ocean is right there at your fingertips. So it's flushed out very well every single day is what I'm saying to you, right? And again, if there's any birds in the water, they stand out, as I showed you earlier. Is that a fisherman out there or something? Yeah, there's a fisherman. And he got his motor up. He got his motor up? No. That was on a Friday. Beautiful day for it. They're getting a couple of codfish, I would imagine. But there's no shells. Now, how can there be no shells in an ocean that is notorious for shells? Even just one shell right now would make me happy. And when you scan around, you discover quite quickly that what I'm telling you is fact. So that's a very long way out there, clearly. And you can see some cormorants up on the rocks up here. And from my angle, they look like cormorants to me. Not very many, but there's a couple there. Now, they don't belong in the province. They shouldn't be here. Just let me look at another one to see if it looks any clearer. Of course, if there's any birds in the water all the way out to here, they would stand out. So, and when I shot the original shots, you see, because I got the zoom lens on here, so even when I'm zooming all the way back, I'm still significantly close, right? Which is handy. What I was doing with these pictures is what we're doing right now, specifically for that purpose, They look for shells and they remind you of the shells. Remind you there's no insects. Someone left their fishing glove there. But you'd always, no matter what, there's always would be insects around these things. And you got seagulls in the community because there's what's called sewage gulls. The sewage will bubble up to the surface. And I don't think I need to explain to you the workings there. And I got a tendency to overdo it with pictures because you don't know. You don't. He's got a. Looks like he got a capelin in his beak, don't it? Bless his heart. I hope he does. But this is low tide. These birds are not feeding. None of these birds are feeding, right? They're not there at the low tide line looking for food. Do you know what I mean? Looks like there's a dead bird right here, though. I can't say for sure. But on these rocks, we're not seeing any snails. A little bit of kelp weed. And the birds are not feeding at low tide because there's nothing there for them to eat. And we've been seeing this for the last number of years and reporting on it. But what we're really interested in is the 46 million migratories and the 427 species that should be here right now. So we should see a pretty good diversity of birds. And because we can cover a large coastline fairly, not quickly, but in a one-day period, we can cover a long distance. And we have access to all these spots. And so we can use that as a marker to determine how healthy it is. So if we've seen hundreds of birds here, we can assume the places we can't see got hundreds or thousands, right? But we're not seeing that. We're seeing the residential seagulls that found the little niches that lived there, born and raised there. But cameras have come a long way. Does anybody remember way back in the day when I first was using digital cameras? And it should have been a crime for me to have one. So this was Shag Rock Lookout. Again, beautiful place for birds, right? Beautiful place for insects. And we're not seeing that. We're right on the highway. And no road kills. So again, we're looking straight out now. We were way down that way, in the bottom of the bay over right there. So now we're in the center of the bay, what's known as Shag Rock. And we're looking back towards the area we just covered. There's some of the seagulls. But if there was any birds out there, you would notice them. You would definitely notice them. And you notice a lot of one of the things I noticed on Sunday that I might forget about, I think there's a couple of ducks down. Yeah, there was a few ducks right here that came along. There they are. Let's see if we got some better pictures, because I spotted them and didn't realize it. I was taking pictures, and then I said, well, I'll try to get a picture. So I think I repositioned myself to get a picture. And there is, like, if that was wild ducks, they won't let you get that close. That's the one thing about wild ducks. They will not let you get close to them. Same thing with a lot of marine life, right? They won't let you get close. And so these expanded shots, I believe that's the small lens. You see these expanded shots, and you don't see anything that stands out, only the few residential seal gulls. Residential seagulls, not seal gull. I don't think there is such a thing as a seal gull, Dana. I know. It's getting late. I'm starting to see double. Well, let's get through this spot, and we'll show you pictures of the next spot tomorrow night. We'll pick up where we left off tonight, tomorrow night. So this is an expansion. Remember, there's that island is out there where it's Shag Rock or Shag Lookout or something. But if there were species here, they would stand out. You don't need to zoom in to see that there's a bunch of species. We might get a better shot of the cormorants up on the hill though. No, on the rock out there. But on the way out there, there is no birds. See that? Now we are, this is Trinity Bay. And this is prime spot at the bottom of the peninsula. It's prime spot for the migratory birds, right? But if there was anything in this bay, you would see it. It would stand out like a sore thumb. And the same thing with the shoreline where there's and there's nothing. Did I see ducks that time? I did see a duck. And then that community's over there. We went to the other side of the community after. Again, like I'm snapping through pictures, but it's because if there was something there, it would stand out. If there's any species, and we're talking 46 million migratory birds are supposed to be here as we speak. And they're not. And this is the evidence. And so this is one of the things about the research expeditions I really hated was there was nothing to look at. It was really boring, right? But it was important. We'll come back over there. I just want to check that little corner. And so clearly these are what you call residential ducks. Wild ducks won't let you get this close, but they're skimming the surface. They're not diving down. In the last number of years, I'd never seen a single duck dive. And then the residential ducks we got here, they're eating the invertebrates without the backbones, the little tiny ones, in the mud. They're not diving down and catching fish like a duck you would expect a duck to do, right? You know, you often heard the expression swim like a duck and dive like a duck because they're prolific divers. And we're not seeing them diving. We're seeing them skimming the surface for microscopic animals. But they're moving constantly. They're not staying there and feasting somewhere. They're on the move the entire time. Right? You see how they just move big distances? They're not finding Mr. Crow. He's looking pretty torn and tattered. And I think there's some a little bit of very tiny amounts of life on the rock, but none of it is healthy. Oh yeah, there was 3 or 4 of these crows were there, and they're scavengers. But I mean, there's nothing there for them to eat. They're not going to fill up their tummies and whatever they're finding, these little nooks and crannies. They're really not, are they? It's desperation is what you're seeing. It's low tide, so they're scavenging, but their scavenging is brutally inefficient. They have to cover, and that was another thing I noticed over the last number of years was they cover they're always moving, and you don't see them like diving, you don't see them grabbing anything, it's just skimming only. So total desperation is what we're seeing. There's water dripping out. And you'll see a lot of the residential ducks where they're in shallow water and their bums up in the air the whole time, and they're digging in the mud looking for the invertebrates without the backbones, the little shrimps. Right, they're always moving, never diving. These particular guys. And they're in the algae, so that's what they're looking for, little tiny invertebrates. I'm not sure what that feller is. There we got another picture of him. Apparently not. He was motoring, eh? Oh, that's right too. Yeah, he was motoring by, and I got time to take one picture. Yeah, that's a cormorant. That's what that fella is. I think he's a cormorant. He certainly looks that way. And oh, I don't know. Yeah, you got a red beak. He's a young cormorant, is what he is. He's like a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or something. And then you see a seagull. He stands out, right? They just stand out. So any kind of bird in the water stands out. So that's 1,100 pictures or something we just ran through tonight. I do believe. So we're gonna leave off at 1,145. You see it up there? That's where we're gonna pick up to tomorrow night. 1,145. Because it's got to be after 12 now. Yeah, it's 5 after 12. And we're going to leave off in that story, which is right after all the farm stuff. So 11:45, that's what I got to find tomorrow night to pick up. And then we'll cover the rest of those pictures from Friday. And then tomorrow night we'll also start covering Saturday or Sunday's pictures on the quads. And at the same time now I'm making plans for 3 more spots, 3 more expeditions. And the problem is you got to travel quite a distance, right? So there's a lot of planning got to go into it. And then if I let it pile up on me, it's going to be hard to get to it. And it's such a terrible story, and I apologize. I didn't create it, obviously, right? But we're just trying to tell the story of the ecosystem post-nuclear meltdowns in Japan. And the industry wants you to believe that nothing happened. And that's a fatal flaw to suggest that nothing happened. Okay. How we doing here? Let's close this down over here so I can get my bearings again. And remember, there's supposed to be 427 species confirmed in Newfoundland. And we've only found 3 or 4 species. And so they're not here. Now, you know, on Saturday we were in the interior, away from the coastline, by a long shot too. And yeah, hi everybody. Let's come over and close the poll down. Did nuclear scientists always know that the radioactive fallout would break the food chain and cause an extinction level event? And everybody agrees. And so if you make it this far in the video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. I don't know if it'll make any difference, but I appreciate it. And it seems like my videos are stemmed at around 200 views. Like I'll climb to 150 views in 6 hours, and then the next 15 hours I'll be lucky if it registers 50 more views. And that my videos get longer, so it looks like they're putting software into my videos after 12 hours. And I haven't been covering that lately, but it's been going on this site for the last 2 years. But I don't see it on any other site. My comments, my live comments don't show up for 12 hours. The video will get longer. I'll get basically no thumbs up until late 12 hours later or something before I start getting thumbs up again. And even then, it'll just be a couple of extra ones above what I got right now. But I can't let stuff like that, the censorship, discourage, because I expect that. They've been doing it to me for a very long time. And what you discover, if you're new here, what you discover quite quickly is I'm very honest. I'm very sincere on top of that, but I'm extremely honest in everything I'm doing. And that I got one of the shittiest jobs anybody could ever have, but I'm very privileged to have the job because it's a worthy job. It's a legacy job. You're leaving a great legacy. At least somebody on the planet had a moral compass, right? And didn't put up with the nuclear industry's brutal assault upon the species and humanity. And so again tonight we're going to cover Calm Down Charlie, one of James Lucett's songs that he put together. And because that song in particular just sounds great, don't it? And it's an insult in one way to the nuclear industry, so it has extra special meaning for me. And it's a great song. There's a great feel to it. And that's going to be our closing song for tonight. I'm going to disappear, let the song play, as a reminder that we're not going to take shit from the nuclear industry. That's what that song means to me too. Is we're not taking any shit from the nuclear industry. And we'll see everybody tomorrow night. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you make it this far. Hugs for everybody. I know these are terrible shows. Have a great night regardless, because it's after midnight my time now. I wait till late at night so there's no background noises for my shows. And you have a great night.
In the Tokyo Bureau, swirling smoke and neon beams. Chicago division, fueled by heated dreams. Calm down, Charlie calls in, voice smooth as silk. Says, Dana, you're dreaming, don't cry over spilt milk. On Dana Durnford show, the chatter's turning wild, but Charlie shoots it down with that cool cat style. Unit 3's no killer, no harm to see life. He chuckles in the static, cuts through the strife. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show. With a snap and a grin, Charlie's voice so clear scatters the dread, dispels all the fear. Mux didn't hurt, he croons with a sigh. Science is for thinkers, not a whim or lie. Though Dana and the crowd may shout and roar, Charlie's unfazed, he's heard it all before. His swinging rationale, like a soothing song, says hold on to logic, we gotta stay strong. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show.